Hello and welcome to the Election Late Show. It's been a busy week of campaigning and we begin with a UKIP morning press conference. What could possibly go wrong? Awkward.
Yeah. So,
give me 5.
High five? High five? Fist bump, come on. Maybe not.
Maybe not. Hey, look who's back. Not him.
It's a wonderful pleasure to be back here at Trimden Labour Club.
Silly us. That was the last election. But the good news is Tony's got his real accent back after 5 years of coaching. Just in time for this announcement.
We're a party that can do them more than one thing at once.
Oh yes, Nigel. How's that presser going? Moustache of the week goes to someone in the audience at the Scottish TV debate. This week, Michael Gove claimed the Conservatives have stopped talking BS.
Are we going to get any mention of the big society in this campaign?
I think it's unlikely that we'll hear the phrase.
The next day, as if, oh, I don't know, to spite him.
Let's be frank, the big society policies have worked.
Earlier this year, the other Ed pretty much said nah to abolishing the non-dom rule.
I think if you abolish the whole status, then probably it ends up costing Britain money.
Then earlier this week, as if, oh, I don't know, to spite him.
The next Labour government will abolish the non-dom rule.
Hold on, huge interest now at that UKIP presser.
Now to questions. Any questions? No, I don't believe there's any questions here today.
No, wait, I have a question. What kind of a guy is Nigel Farage?
He's a really, really green guy.
What's that, Joey?
He's a really, really green guy.
I think that's good.
Wait, another question, much better than mine.
Do you know what a vajazzle is?
No.
Basically, there's been lots and lots and lots of election campaigning this week, and someone's had just about enough. I bet you thought they'd cut back to me with my head on the table. What do you take me for? Anyway, enough of little old me trying satire. Turns out the Greens are full of wits.
Harmony.
Have you ever wondered why I sound just like my deputy? It's sweeter when we all agree. A party political harmony.
So, every Friday night until the election, we'll be bringing you an in-depth and possibly irreverent roundup of the week's campaigning. It will not, under any circumstances, be described as a sideways look at the week's news. Instead, with the help of unbelievably modern technology, the odd senior candidate, some of the nation's leading pundits, and what the politicians still insist on calling ordinary people, I'll be trying to work out what's flown, what's flailed, and what's landed somewhere in between. With me tonight, Labour's Shadow Energy Secretary, Caroline Flint, Peter Oborne, until recently of the Daily Telegraph, and the author Will Self. Peter, let's begin with you. Are your juices flowing yet? Is this campaign shaping up to be a classic?
Actually, it's a very interesting campaign. I mean, and the last couple of days have been particularly interesting when you've seen the Tory polls sagging and the Fallon disaster when he accused the Labour leader of being a traitor. And so the Tories are in a bit of a crisis, and that's very interesting. Let's say I would have preferred this campaign ought to have begun next Monday. It is a 6-week-long campaign. Parliament was dissolved 3 weeks too early. It should have been dissolved.
What would change if that had happened? How would that focus more?
Traditionally, campaigns do last for 3 weeks. That's what they're meant to last for. At the moment, it's a bit like the Cricket World Cup. You know, it has interesting moments, but it just goes on for far too long. And it would just be much more dramatic and much more... The drama would be properly paced and it would be building up to something. And we've had 2 or 3 weeks already of high-intensity campaigning. Got 3 more, 4 weeks to go of that.
3 or 4 more to go, Will Self. Does that fill you with glee?
No, I think Peter's nailed it. You want a 3-act development, don't you? You want 1 week establishing, then you want all the manoeuvring in week 2, and then the finale.
Well, we've held off. We're only going to be doing 4 of these shows, Caroline. You know. Presumably, you enjoy the cut and thrust of campaigning rather more than perhaps these two enjoy watching it.
Yeah, I do like campaigning, and I have to say it probably started even before you know, the last 2 weeks in terms of people knowing the date of the election, and everything then is sort of, if you like, tempered by that, I suppose, in terms of what was going on in Parliament before it actually dissolved. But, I mean, it is a long, short campaign, there's no doubt about that, and momentum is going to be really important. And, you know, I'm pretty pleased with the momentum we've got at the moment.
Have you got momentum?
Yeah, I think we have. I think I agree with what Peter said. I think this week's not been a good week for the Tories at all. I think they've been on the back foot on a number of issues. Non-DOMs, how would they get themselves into a situation where they spend a whole day defending some tax dodgers and then fall into the Fallon situation, accusing Ed of being a traitor, and then today coming up with, as we saw on the tape, we've suddenly lost the big society, we're back on the big society. So it's not been, I think, and I'm obviously Labour, and you say she would say that, but I think most commentators would say it's not been a great week for the Tories.
Well, it's funny that you say that. Not least because now it's time to reveal our secret weapon in the war against spin and evasion. We've called it the vote worm, and so must you. First, we made a film of the notable moments in Labour's election week. Obviously, we will be looking at different parties in the coming programmes. Next, we got 300 people selected by the pollsters' comrades to watch it and hit a thumbs up or a thumbs down button every single second. It ends up creating this red line of weighted data that goes up and down with the public mood. And we'll be picking over some of those numbers with Caroline in a second. But first of all, let's have a look at the way the public reacted to some of those key campaign moments. Right from the start, just note the difference between the initial reaction to Ed Miliband compared to the reaction towards the end of his speech.
There are now 116,000 non-DOMs. It's costing at least hundreds of millions of pounds to our country, and it can't be justified. Why should people be able to enjoy all of the virtues of our great country and not pay tax like everyone else? Why should there be one rule for some people and another rule for everybody else? It isn't fair, it isn't just, it holds Britain back, and we will stop it.
Then the other thing that the Tories said, they said, we're all in it together. And then what they did was they had a tax cut for people on the highest incomes, over £150,000, millionaires getting tens of thousands of pounds.
The Prime Minister doesn't really believe that we should leave Europe. Not even the Europe as it is today. This was a concession to party, a manoeuvre to access some of the UKIP vote, a sop to the rampant anti-European feeling of parts of the media. It is greatly to Ed Miliband's credit that he resolutely refused to make that trade.
Well, we've already seen with Mr Miliband that he'll do anything to get into power. We saw that when he fought his own brother for the leadership. The danger now for Britain is that he'll cobble together some backstairs deal with the SNP, which will result in higher taxes, more borrowing and weaker defence. And that will affect people in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland if we end up losing our nuclear submarines, which is an absolute red line for the Scottish Nationalist Party.
Fascinating stuff, not least Caroline Flint, because you can see the worm wriggling, if that's the right verb to use, even on key words. So a good week for you?
I think actually...
even better than you realised before you saw the worm.
Well, you know, I mean, and I don't want to be complacent about where we are. It's a long campaign, as we've just said, but actually I think what was interesting was that, you know, what we've been talking about, you know, from the beginning of this campaign is about, you know, a successful Britain is where the majority is successful, and I think that has a chime with people when they then, you know, hear the defence of a few at the top, and I think that comes through in the worm that we've seen on those extracts.
There's a danger of celebrating indifference. The policy pronouncement itself for Mr Miliband sort of recorded quite well, but when people see his face for the first time, ambivalence is quite a good result.
Well, you know, I mean, I think today, or was it yesterday, in one of the polls, actually Ed was put ahead of David Cameron in terms of his ratings, and actually we've had a good showing, I think, from Ed in the debate so far, and we're really pleased to have every opportunity we can for Ed to be able to speak directly to the public and for them to listen to what he has to say and make their own mind up.
Let's do exactly that. Let's speak to the public. Chris Joy is the face of the public for us first tonight in Portsmouth, and there's two Eds, of course, Chris. Are they doing it for you?
No, they're not. Before this campaign began, Ed Miliband was viewed as incompetent. And since it's begun, I think, for me personally, he's still coming across as incompetent and with an ill-thought-out campaign. There seems to be no cohesion between him and his backroom team or his support team. Ed Balls came out and undermined his policy or sentiment on non-DOMs this week. It started off as we're going to abolish non-DOMs, then we're going to change the names. Now we're going to have a discussion about what we ought to do about it. There seems to be no tie-up between Ed Balls, his policy and his backroom staff. They seem to react after he has spoken. Nobody seems to know what
Chris,
he is planning.
I'm just going to put that to Caroline, a sense of, well, disparity between the two most senior members of the party.
Well, one of the things, of course, was that the interview of Ed Balls that was used was spliced at the end to miss something very important he said, which was about we will look further at what we can do to tackle others. No, but no, I know it is. I mean, that's what the Tories did. They cut the interview.
That's what politicians
and that's maybe what people have seen on their TV screens. But the truth is that, you know, we have said that apart from those who are legitimately coming here for a temporary period of time of 2 to 3 years, non-dom status will go, and we will get rid of this 200-year-old rule that has allowed people to live here for long periods of time, even pass it on to their children who haven't been born abroad, to have this exclusive tax arrangement where they don't pay in a way that UK citizens do. And I think actually, you know, that's come across, I think, strongly, and I think the Tories are the ones who are on the bad end of the argument when it comes to that issue.
But we'll see. Let's just have a look, though, at how that policy, as opposed to the politician, played out. We'll look at the Midlands first, and again you can see that the picture is irresistible. He appears on the screen, people don't really react at all, and then slowly, as the mention of the non-dom policy increases, the picture begins to look better and better. In Scotland, similarly, well, I say similarly, he enjoys something of a popularity plunge halfway through proceedings, and again, it's the policy rather than the man delivering it that seems to be getting the positive response from people who are reacting to it as they see it. I'm interested in whether it is actually the big priority. I want to go to Fiona Rutherford next, who is in Rutland and describes herself really as a dyed-in-the-wool Labour loyalist. Fiona, this non-dom policy, would it be among your top priorities?
I believe it's a really good idea, and I think it's a really, really good start to dealing with tax evasion in general. But I personally would like to actually see a bit more substance to policies, particularly relating to tax evasion, because it is a massive problem. I mean, every year there's around about a £35 billion loss, I believe. So I think that at this stage of the election, we should be hearing more policies of substance about how the parties will tackle issues like these.
Well, Self, you can see where the idea came from. It's a sort of attempt to unhook them from the billionaires that some claim the Labour Party was enthralled to under Tony Blair. Is this sort of non-dom attack going to win back some of the disillusioned working-class voters?
Yeah, it kind of looks weird that they wheeled out that cadaver of an ex-Prime Minister who's kind of lacquered with his own wealth in the same week that you're pushing this agenda. I don't know. What I don't hear coming from Labour, I hear a lot of tinkering, but what I don't hear is a resiling from the fundamental, and dominating idea in political economy in our society, which is the trickle down, the idea that these hyper-rich people really benefit society in some way. I don't hear Labour adopting any of that unfashionable socialist rhetoric.
The first attempt at saying what's good for the rich is good for the country is no longer the case.
Well, I'd like to hear that clearly stated. I mean, what we in fact...
actually said that. He said that on a number of speeches and contributions he's made over the last few weeks, where he said this trickle-down effect, that's not the way we want to run things. And why we've said that, that you cannot have a successful economy unless, and when a recovery comes, working people, the majority of them, feel some benefit from that. I mean, we have been saying that very much for, the last couple of years, and our policies on a number of areas, you know, underpin that sense of what our society should be about.
Peter, well, I mean, you'll forgive me,
You're
but
obviously
you
not
know,
listening to the right
no,
programmes,
I'm not.
Will.
I find it agonising to slavishly listen to your party
I'm not
spokesman
asking
talk
you to
about this stuff.
slavishly listen.
And I certainly don't want to be like one of the vermiculating worms who, like little lab rats, you call upon to push a little button and respond to a politician. And you all sit here as if this is normal behaviour.
Absolutely nobody was harmed or coerced in the creation of that worm. I want to make that absolutely clear.
They're already harmed.
Peter Oborne, Peter Mandelson, of course, was famously relaxed about the relationship with the super rich and people making huge pots of money. Will Self is utterly, spectacularly unpersuaded that Ed Miliband's any different. Are you?
No, I do think I think Ed Miliband is a break point from the last 30 years of British politics. We've had neoliberal economics since the late 70s, and that was Thatcher, and it was inherited. It wouldn't have happened. John Smith was against it, but he tragically died. Got Tony Blair on a wash of business folk, and then you've got Cameron, and they're all neoliberal. Clearly, Ed Miliband is going to be a break from that.
Convince Will Self.
Will doesn't pay a lot of attention to politics, which is, explains why he doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, right from the moment he started, Miliband has been attacking wealth, attacking big corporate profits, attacking energy profits. He's been against profit, as Caroline knows.
Misuse.
No, but against and it's very, very interesting. And there are big attacks on the rich. And so he's setting out a new vision of society, which is much closer to the Attlee vision, to the Keir Hardie vision, than the Blair vision. You know, and it's a very, very interesting moment. If he wins this election, it's not just that; he'll also be a break point in terms of the neoconservative agenda. You know, he's the first leader.
He's signing up for Trident.
I think that he's. I agree with that. That's interesting. But on the other hand, he was against Syria. He called for a Palestinian state. There's a lot. He's the first break from that, and so he's potentially a completely fulcrum figure, a kind of a fact.
Let's have a think about that Conservative agenda that you mentioned, and in fact, perhaps inevitably, the focus shifted this week from the policy to the person as a result of the Conservative agenda, particularly Michael Fallon's agenda to, well, personalise the issues in a fairly spectacular way. Was that par for the course, Peter Oborne, or was that a little out of the ordinary?
It's very interesting. The Conservatives have two basic strategies at the moment. One is, and they're entitled to do this, is to say we've handled the economy well, and the other one is to say that Ed Miliband is a very weak leader, and we're going to rubbish him. And this is quite a.
And then say he's really tough and everything else, you know, and it's the mixed messaging,
yeah,
isn't it?
but what is the thing which hasn't happened in this campaign? The Conservative strategy in this campaign was that Miliband would collapse. He would turn into a figure of ridicule. He'd be like Michael Foot in 1983 or William Hague in 2001. And what hasn't happened, the thing which hasn't happened in this campaign is Miliband hasn't collapsed. And this leads, and the Fallon thing, which is obviously, he was told to do that. He's a nice man, Fallon. He was instructed by Central High Command.
What would happen if he said no?
He was entitled to do that, but he obviously chose not to. And he went after in a vicious, personal way, making completely appalling and unfair remarks.
Hang on, I just want to hold you there, because those are strong words, vicious, completely unfair and appalling remarks. David Fleming, you're joining us from Melrose in Scotland. Would you agree with Peter Oborne's analysis, vicious and unfair and appalling?
Not at all. I find it quite strange that it's appalling and unfair. Mr. Miliband, he actually knew that he had the unions backing him, because when you go back to the election between the people that wanted after Brown left, the older brother David would have made a better option than the younger brother, but the younger brother actually had the vote. He knew he had the vote, and he led his brother along the garden path. And unfortunately, the Labour Party lost a potentially good, strong leader, and they've now got a Mr. Shadow.
Well, hold that thought while I talk to Francesca Simon, who I think sort of comes from the other side of the political spectrum. Francesca, how did you feel about Michael Fallon's suggestion that Ed Miliband would stab the UK in the back because he'd done the same so happily to his older brother?
I think it was a completely irrelevant comment to make. We want to be discussing policies that are going to make a difference. We don't want to be discussing people's personal life and their family life and whether these personal attacks are not going to change the government. We need to know what the next government's going to do for us. And I completely think it was appalling.
Well, that word, Peter, your word of the night, appalling. Caroline Flint, it's par for the course, isn't it? No one likes being in the gutter, but it's where elections are won and lost.
Well, I think the problem is that they've done themselves some damage with it, because I agree, Michael Fallon is not normally like that, and he embarrassed himself, and I think in making...
Harriet Harman once called Danny Alexander a ginger rodent.
But I think he embarrassed himself in the way in which he tried to bring these two issues together, which just was ridiculous. I mean, apart from anything else, it's wrong. Ed Miliband's made clear on a number of occasions where we stand on Trident, and to try and somehow say that because he stood in an election for the leadership against his brother David, that somehow that means he's going to stab everyone in the back over defence policy is quite ridiculous.
But as Peter said, he was following orders. And you know from the doorstep that this work, people find that problematical, they find it odd.
But why was he following orders? And that's because I think we've seen a bit of desperation coming out of Tory High Command this week. And so, they had a bad day on the NonDoms, then it's let's get in there and sort of, try and... I mean, it is interesting, going back to what Peter said before about how they've tried to ridicule Ed Miliband, for the last few years and say he's weak. And then the next minute they're on there saying he's so tough, he took on his brother and he's absolutely ruthless. And I just think it's not working for him. It's just not
What's the difference between Harriet Harman calling Danny Alexander?
It's that he's untrustworthy, Caroline. That's not the point. The point is that he can't be trusted because he's willing to...
But the point on Trident is it's not true, Will, because he's been absolutely clear on that issue of policy. We voted with the Conservatives in the last Parliament on an issue around Trident.
You've already got a leader who, rather like Barack Obama in the States, is already relying on, brandishing his big phallic missile to show that he's a tough guy.
We think it's actually we actually think it's just good in terms of national security, and I support Trident. I'm not
actually one of the disappointing things about Labour last week. Labour did change its policy last week. It was pathetic. The moment that Fallon stood up, your policy had been that you might have 3 submarines, just so long as they were all underneath the water, and that's what your poor hapless Vernon Coker was saying early in the morning. And somebody came and squashed Coker, your colleague Coker, and by the afternoon it was 4 submarines. We want 4 and we won't wait. That was...
I have to say, this is an aspect of politics that I do follow, because I'm interested in it. Very interesting that it should come up at this point in the campaign, because a lot of people have been saying, well, defence is not going to figure, international relations are not going to figure, but they're there, and they're not submerged. They're actually cruising along the surface now, and Labour did flip-flop over this.
Well,
I don't agree.
The Conservatives went into coalition with a party that was just as opposed to Trident.
Yes.
As the SNP are. So for Fallon, again, it seems to me, Caroline, you're unpacking the logic, and Will, you're identifying some of the more emotional responses to the notion of sort of political fratricide, to the notion of betrayal.
These guys, they spend a lot of time in a culture where the idea of being adversarial in your kind of working life needs... It's rather like, I don't know what the analogy is, they have some kind of partition in themselves. I think to ordinary people, the idea that you run up against your brother in a contest like that and you do everything to defeat him is quite, it's quite interesting. What does it say about your character?
Well, what does it say? What do you think it says about his character?
It says to me that they are part of this, what's interesting to me about this election, and I think a lot of people, is that the vociferous character of our political culture can no longer be disguised by the first-past-the-post system. And everything comes in our politics from this binary opposition. It's it's Ed against Dave, it's Labour against the Tories, it's the rich against the poor. And in fact, what we're seeing in this 2015 election is that those kind of binary things are just not holding anymore.
Do you believe in the hereditary principle, do you?
Well, it's interesting. Hang on, Peter, because I'm intrigued by by Will citing the sort of potential redundancy of the first-past-the-post system. There are, of course, many constituencies in this country where it is already, to all intents and purposes, redundant, and we're going to visit one of them. This is for people who
not with the word.
Astonishing. If you're already bored with this election, then possibly for the reasons Will Self has cited, do spare a thought for our reporter David Grossman. This is his 6th on the trot. Here he is in 1992, having the kind of glamorous experience that political reporters on the campaign trail often enjoy. Well, this year he's had enough. David has torn up his press pass and renounced the battle buses, swearing to ignore the party leaders, the key marginals, and anywhere else you might expect to find normal representatives of the media. He's gone off the grid. So, what's he covering? We're not really sure, but I'm told that yesterday he went to Runnymede.
800 years ago, almost to the day, here on the banks of the Thames at Runnymede, the Magna Carta was signed.
So where better to come to see the 2015 general election close up than here, the birthplace of British democracy? Arguably, some people would say.
But, well, it turns out there are plenty of better places, because this seat, Runnymede and Weybridge, is a safe seat that hasn't changed hands in living memory. And if you guessed it's a safe Conservative seat, well, well done you. It's hard to find anyone here even mildly interested in this election. Has the election come by here at all?
Well, I live off grid. I live in an eco village, so they haven't come and put a pamphlet through my letterbox.
Have you got a letterbox?
I don't know.
An eco village? Well, that's definitely off grid. Solar power, shopping trolleys, but no election. I did, however, find one person who thought opting out of voting was wrong.
No, I think it's a mistake. Voting does not mean that you approve of the system as it is. I think most social changes have come about through people like this getting together and creating movements on the ground and then working out how to turn that into actual electoral leverage. You know, I think people fighting against slavery, people fighting for the right to women, the last thing they were saying was that the system as it is legitimate. But I think there is a power system and you've got to try and change it.
Good luck fomenting an agrarian anarcho-syndicalist revolution in this part of Surrey. In 1649, a group called the Diggers tried. The site of their commune is now one of the most expensive and exclusive private estates in Britain. But maybe Labour is trying to build on this radical heritage. I don't know. I couldn't find them, and they didn't return our calls. Still, I must be able to find some Conservatives in this most conservative of seats. I headed over to the address for Philip Hammond's campaign. He's the Foreign Secretary, first elected here in '97.
Rather confusingly, there's a Michael Gove poster.
It turns out it was a shared office, but it didn't matter because all the activists have been shipped out to more marginal seats.
You know, we will be helping out from this office next week with a whole load of work for Mid Wales. So.
Oh, you're Mid Wales from here, wow.
Brecon and Radnor.
Brecon and Radnor, right.
So, because at the end of the day, if people haven't made their minds up here, so I mean, just going around bashing doors, all you get here is, you know, why are you bothering to knock my door? Because, although having said that, you cannot assume naturally that people living in big houses will vote Conservative.
No.
Unless they live in the £2 million houses, in which case they probably are, even if they're Labour.
The mansion house houses, yeah.